Thanks for being here today. First, let me apologize to the folks that came up to me and said, "Hey, how's it going?" And I looked at you like I didn't know who you were. I haven't seen you in 3 years, most of you guys. So forgive me. I'm not the best with names and faces, right, Peter? No, again, thanks for being here. Apologies about being short a couple of chairs as well. We're obviously really pleased that the room is full and even a little more than full, so that's great. As you can see, this is our first BC meeting. We're going to tell you about the Fenestration Canada chapters a little bit later on in a bit more depth. For those of you that looked at me when you came in and went, "Who's that?" Well, I'm Terry Adamson. I'm the technical director with Fenestration Canada. Most of you would know me from West Tech Windows. And it's 1 year tomorrow that I left. We need to talk actually about my 1 year. More vacation, more vacation. Can you go anywhere yet? I don't know. So we're going to tell you a little bit about us today. Some non-members here, a few, and then of course members of Fenestration Canada. We're going to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing. We're going to be reaching out to get some of you engaged a little more than maybe you were yesterday. Being a member with FenCan is all about being involved. So we're going to work on that. We've got a really great presentation coming from Jaugelis talking about comfort glazing, which is quite a large topic, not only in BC, but across Canada. So we're going to do that. And I take a moment to thank our sponsors. This session is presented by Sherwin-Williams, who has been good enough to step up, and they're going to sponsor our sessions of these across the country. So really appreciative to them. And then, of course, Becca, Amesbury Truth, Intertech, and Cardinal are all sponsoring today's session. So thank you very much to those guys. We're going to hear from Scott in a bit. So we're gonna dive into this. I'm going to invite Adrian Edge up, and we're going to go through. Come on, do it. Oh, no, it's not going to work, is it? 3 years, and you're trying to figure out how all this stuff works. Yeah. All right, right, here we go. There we go. So here's what we're going to do. Adrian's going to comment a bit. We're going to hear a brief comment from Scott from Amesbury Truth. Then we're going to see Al's presentation on comfort glazing. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Fenestration Canada, and in particular what's happening in BC. Stefan Labelle, who is Fenestration Canada's executive director, is going to tell you about the creation of the chapters across the country and what that means. We're going to do a bit of an open forum, which would typically be part of what we do when we do the chapter committee meetings online. So we're going to talk a little bit, we'll hopefully hear from some of you guys about some of the challenges and what you want to see Fenestration Canada doing. Adrian will wrap it up, and then we're going to have an open bar to share a cocktail that we haven't done in so long with you guys this afternoon. So Adrian, come on.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. So many of your faces I remember from 3 years ago, and then some of you I interact on a bit of a more regular basis. But I'm Adrian Edge. I chair the BC chapter that used to be the Pacific Regional Committee. In Canada, I also chair the Access to Trainers, and I work with Intertech Windows. So I was just going to give a quick overview of kind of where the BC chapter is, both past, present, and future. In the past, the Pacific Regional Committee was really dedicated to quality speakers. So we were really focused on getting people from the province that were willing to speak to code changes and passive house, performance changes. Really, I was doing my best to essentially encapsulate some of the information I was getting from the group and finding good speakers so we can talk more about that topic. So I think the last year was pretty successful on that front. We had a handful of really good speakers for the committee, and really in the present, I would say that that's kind of the same direction that we're heading. one of the big changes is something like this. We're open to do more live events so that we can be a bit more connected. We can do more of the networking things. My hope for our future, though, is that we can become a bit more specific about some of these tasks and apply them to more of the provincial conversations and the federal conversations. That, you know, taking some of these topics here in BC and help managing that conversation through Fen Canada, I think it's one of our great strengths in BC specifically. Like when I talk to the chapters across the country, we are unique here in that we have maintained a focus on technical issues. I would say the rest of the provinces right now are, and we're not an exception, but we seem to be driving the conversation in a different direction, is labor and supply constraints and, you know, the pains with our current supply chain. So I believe the rest of the provinces are very focused on making sure that's their conversation. I would say with the exception of maybe the Atlantic Committee, that is really taken on installation as kind of their forward thinking, and then some of the NAFS compliance has been kind of theirs out there. Otherwise, I would say they're struggling with survival needs. And UC, I think we have a real potential to really guide some of the technical conversation if we're really thoughtful about it. Anyway, as the chair, that's kind of my hopes and dreams for this group, is that in the future we can drive some of that conversation pretty focused. For today, I'm still gathering input from you all to kind of get an idea of what BC wants to do. Okay, so that kind of wraps up my portion. I'm going to pass it to Al. I think you've got the real presentation here.
Yeah, okay, just while Al's getting this session up, we did offer up an opportunity for our sponsors to comment. So Mr. Stevenson from Amesbury Truth, would you like to say anything about your offering?
Easy on the mister. Everyone, Scott from Amesbury Truth. Some of you deal with us direct, some of you deal with us maybe through our distribution. We're happy to speak to you as a partner. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not.
Yes, he is.
He isn't. No, seriously, I'm directly salaried. So we're approachable. We have engineering resources for you. So please don't be shy. Couple quick things about some interesting items that we're working on that we haven't really played in. We developed a entry-level patio door sliding roller. It's a single roller. It passes on a standard at 75 pounds per. It's inexpensive because there's only one wheel on it. So we've got some other cool stuff we're working on. To me, it's just great to see this group together, and we're going to advocate for our industry. And I got roped into a committee already.
Good show. Way to go, Scott.
We'll be see you
All
later.
right. Just so you know, you did offer comments to the other sponsors. We threw this together pretty quickly, so they weren't able to put anything together for us. But that should not go unsaid, that we appreciate their support and their being. So thanks, Scott. Share it to us. There you go. Okay.
Good. I'm seeing icons here that you guys aren't seeing. That's good. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. And it's really great to see many of you familiar faces that I haven't seen in a while. Some of us going back many years. And it's great to be in an in-person meeting again. Today, I'm going to be sharing some, I guess I could say I'm test driving my thoughts on thermal comfort and how I think we should approach it as an industry. And these are personal views, they're not consensus views from a committee. They haven't been debated or tested. And so I'm actually looking forward to feedback on the thoughts that I'm going to present today, on the approach that I'm proposing. Might be a helpful one to have this kind of a discussion. And so basically, I'm willing to be challenged, corrected. I may have some errors of fact. I may have opinions that you know, people strongly disagree with. And I'm hoping, though, that we can have discussions that will lead to some industry consensus so that we can actually put forth some guidance documentation, whether it's web documentation or other kinds of documents, to help inform a really useful discussion on occupant, basically occupant comfort, both cold discomfort and thermal discomfort issues. So consider this a kind of a verbal discussion paper. And as I say, you know, I haven't presented this before, and I may stumble here and there in the presentation, but I basically want to get across some content, some ideas, and then see where that takes us. Let's see what the situation is. With the pointer on, I can't really reach down.
Take the pointer over to the bottom left.
Bottom left.
There.
There it is. Thank you, Murray. There's a pro.
Wouldn't know anything about
There's a pro.
It's amazing the stuff Murray knows.
it. None of it useful. Except until just now.
There you go. Okay. So topics that I'm going to cover, and what we're at 12:15. Hopefully we can finish in an hour or so, but I struggle on that one. Thermal radiation and comfort. I want to understand thermal radiation and comfort. I want to look at an available glass configurations table that I've put together, which I'm calling your thermal comfort toolkit. My idea is to try and summarize a lot of information that we all know, but you can't put your finger on. And I think this may help us in having productive discussions with each other, but also as a sales tool, also for window manufacturers, you know, and salespeople, to be able to talk to people about comfort issues with specific ideas of how you go from the comfort challenge to a glass product that would be suitable for it. We'll touch on choosing glass for occupant comfort. I'm going to speak a little bit about our present and future climate, because I think in the context of solar heat gain, we need to be not looking at the past, but looking at the future of our climate, and perhaps radically rethinking how we approach that subject. And then some rules of thumb. I was hoping to come up with some really intelligent rules of thumb, and realized that it wasn't that easy. And but I put some thoughts together, and you'll see where I'm going with this as we move along. So just to have a better understanding of thermal radiation and how we react to things in our environment, I've taken some text here from the Windows 7 user manual. Windows is the software program that we use to evaluate all these glass properties. All objects emit invisible thermal radiation, right? With warmer objects emitting more radiation than colder ones. If you hold your hand in front of an oven window, you'll feel the radiant energy emitted by that warm surface. Your hand is also radiating heat to the oven window. But since the oven window is warmer than your hand, the net balance of radiant flow is toward your hand and it is warm. So that's what's going on when we feel heat and cold. We are radiating, all of us, each one of us is radiating heat right now. That desk you're sitting at is radiating heat energy. And so it's constantly, everything that isn't that absolute zero is radiating some amount of energy. Imagine your hand touching a single glazed window in winter. Its surface is much colder. The cold glass and your warm hand each emit radiant energy. But since your hand is warmer, it emits more towards the window than it gains, and you feel a cooling effect. Thus, a gold glazing surface in a room chills everything else around it. So why is this man sitting so far from the window? Could it be that the glass surfaces are uncomfortably cold? So as I said, all matter with a temperature greater than absolute zero emits thermal radiation. Infrared radiation emitted from animals and humans is an example of thermal radiation. That's a wisdom from Wikipedia. Interestingly enough, the visible spectrum, you see that colored rainbow up there? The visible spectrum, everything we see on the spectrum of solar radiation in the universe is thinner than the green line going down to the bottom chart, which is trying to show an almost infinite array of solar radiation wavelengths, or a bunch of solar radiation period. So we're talking about heat, what we perceive to be as radiant heat. It's a portion of this invisible spectrum. This article also goes on to say, and I like the wording they use because it's layman language, right? Shiny metal surfaces, which have low emissivities, both in the visible wavelengths and in the far infrared, can be used to reduce heat transfer in both directions. So, and shiny metal surfaces is what we have in low-E coatings. These coatings are composed of shiny metal atoms applied to glass surfaces at a density that transmits visible light, reflects, but also reflects most of the far infrared radiant heat spectrum. So visible light goes through it, but the longer waves of heat kind of bounce off the metal particles based on the density that they're scattered on that glass. And so only a small portion of that radiant heat actually is making it through that coating. The property called emissivity is the proportion of radiant heat that actually makes it past that low-E coating. It's transmitted to the other side. And some of you will know some of these facts, but ordinary uncoated float glass transmits about 84% of the heat energy. It only reflects 16% back into the room. So you've got an emissivity of 0.84. If we take one of the earlier generations of low-E coating with an emissivity of 0.2, we would have a coating that reflects 80% of the heat back into the room, still transmitting about or emitting about 20%. And if we look at our probably the best low-E coating, the lowest emissivity coating we have in the residential window sector, which would be a triple silver type coating, your emissivity is 0.02, which means only 2% of that radiant heat energy is transmitted through that coating. 98% is reflected back into the room. So what we really have in low-E coatings are highly effective reflective coatings that are essentially invisible, but doing a lot to keep the heat in our buildings. So the coating is the single greatest innovation in the energy efficiency, solar heat gain control, and comfort performance of window glass. We also talk about argon fills, warm edge spacer systems. Those all help to make that insulating glass unit better, but it's the coating that's doing the heavy lifting. Now, there's been a lot of coatings developed by a lot of manufacturers. And when you combine these coatings with 2 or 3 or more glass layers, you have the ability to control, significantly control the shorter wavelength solar radiation from the sun, as well as the longer wavelength heat that's being emitted from the warm surfaces inside the building. And the difference between high solar and low solar coatings is both of them are doing about the same job in keeping the heat in. They actually have, U factors don't vary very much, but the high solar gain coatings are emitting more of the solar energy spectrum, the sun's heat, and the low solar gain coatings have a denser particle density, and they're trying to capture mainly visible light. They're capturing less of that solar heat energy, but still doing a lot, still being just as effective keeping the heat, you might call it the indoor heat in. We know that with triple pane glass having at least 2 low-E coatings, we have glass that will have winter indoor surface temperatures that are just a couple degrees cooler than our walls. And when you get that balance right, you feel comfortable outside the window or away from the window. These are diagrams that you often see in people talk about passive house, but they're very useful in trying to explain this concept. And what research has found is that when the temperature difference between different wall surfaces in a room is within about 4.5 degrees Celsius, most people will feel comfortable anywhere in that room. Some people will still be uncomfortable near the colder surface, but by and large, there's most people will feel comfortable. And really, that's really what the whole passive house idea. That's why they wanted triple glazed windows before anybody else thought that that was a great idea. It was so you could eliminate space heat, so you wouldn't have to have a heat duct by the window. You wouldn't need a radiator near the window because the window was warm. And so you could actually reduce your heating plant, you know, and just provide a minimal amount of conditioned air through the building, because wherever you were in that building, you're feeling, you know, comfortably warm. So if we have a situation where the indoor radiant temperature is 21, even if it's -18 outside, that's the NFRC winter design conditions. If you have glass that will give you up to around 17 degrees Celsius or R8 in an R8 window, you've got that condition, you've got that comfort condition that you don't have to feel cold discomfort, even with a large glazed surface. When the temperature difference is greater than 4.5 degrees between the wall surfaces in the room, most people will feel cold near that window. And that sense of cold in this setting where one surface is warm and the other one's cold, and how you feel in the middle, that's called radiant asymmetry. In other words, part of you is, you know, encountering warmer temperature, is encountering colder temperature, and radiant asymmetry is one way of characterizing an environment where some surfaces are colder than they should be for occupant comfort. And it's interesting that this is a John Stroud, some of you may know or heard of him. He's a building science prof at Waterloo University, is a principal at RDH Building Science, and early this winter he posted this on LinkedIn, bragging about his great windows. Looking out at -23 degrees Celsius this morning is very nice and cozy from behind triple glazed fiberglass framed windows and airtight and insulated walls. At this time of year, we get reports of many people complaining that they're cold near their windows. They've got comfort complaints and drafts by the window, and also condensation. While I live in a house that's as comfortable and likely more comfortable than being in a Miami hotel, just that the room is different. And so he's telling us a little bit more about his window. There's a comment, those frame corners are down to 18 degrees C. So he actually used an infrared thermal camera to take a picture of the corner of his window in order to tell us that those window corners are at plus 18. He says, brr, that's cold. Well, actually, it isn't cold. If it's 18 degrees, he's probably very comfortable. But that's the coldest part of his window. And the camera seems to show that his glass is at 22.3 degrees Celsius. So clearly, he's got that passive house level comfort beside his window. We can make these windows today. This window is not a passive house window. This is probably an ordinary fiberglass window that could be 15 years old in Manitoba with a triple glazed package with 2 lowly coatings, and that's what you're going to get, comfort, even when it's really cold outside. So this could be a cold winter's day in Vancouver or Victoria. In a 1990s home with dual pane clear glass, you'd want to be sitting at least this far from the window to be comfortable. But with the right glass, you'd probably want to sit closer to that window because you wouldn't have to avoid as much cold. So next thing I want to talk about then, okay, that's great. We know that some glass products can actually do this, but what about the other glass products? What's the range we have available to choose from in our industry? So this presentation features a table of what I would call typical representative data for common glass configurations used in the Canadian glass industry. It contains simplifications to help us see both the similarities and the significant differences between the available and widely used low-E coating options we're all familiar with. The simplifications include rounding U factors from 3 significant digits to 2, and ranking the configurations by R value.
R value being the inverse of the U factor. And I'm using inch-pound R factors. So the R factors we're all familiar with in the table. And I'm using data computed with Windows 3, which I did years ago when I worked at Innotech, trying to understand, what's the range of options that the glass products have. And so I basically used that data set because I had it to create this table. Arguably, it could be perhaps revisited with the latest version of the software. There might be some other codings we want to consider, but I think it's basically a stab at trying to give us a working tool that will help us. And one of the things I've added to the table is a parameter that is never reported in window labels or in any glass brochures, but the window program generates a number called relative heat gain. Every time you do that simulation to find out your U values, your solar heat gain, it reports a relative heat gain value. And it is the relative heat, the heat gain through that glass assembly at standard conditions, reported in watts per meter, watts per square meter. So instead of a percentage like solar heat gain, and saying, yeah, this is 0.25 and this is 0.28 or this is 0.3, how that's going to affect you? It's hard for that ratio to be meaningful. It seemed to me that the relative heat gain parameter, which is watts per square meter, now we know how much energy is coming through the different glass options. To me, it was more relatable. It's like finding out that, oh, geez, I got a 10% raise, or I got a $12,000 raise. Which would you rather have? I mean, if you weren't, the dollars just sound like they're real, and a percentage or a ratio to most people isn't real. So I've added that as a parameter. So configuration is just a particular arrangement or a pattern of a group of things, and I'm calling these what this table is reporting is configurations, and you'll see why. I was going to review the terminology. Well, I'll just mention a few things. When NFRC evaluate, not NFRC, when we use those NFRC standards to evaluate these energy parameters, the sun is always normal to the glass at right angles. In real life, it's rarely in that position. A little bit in the morning in the east, a little bit in the west, but we hardly ever see the sun coming through our windows directly in line. However, everything that's measured about glass in this whole program is measured at 90 degrees to the glass. You can still get good comparisons of how this performs relative to that, even though that condition doesn't maybe appear in the real world or in your experience of life. But so there we go. I don't know. Well, I'll just mention this. So what's good about U factor is that it tells us how much heat is flowing through a window. It's watts per square meter per degree of temperature difference between the indoor and outdoor. So if you know the temperature difference between the indoor and outdoor, and you know a U factor, you just do a quick multiplication and you can say how many watts of energy are being transmitted through that window. Again, under NFRC standard conditions. Your mileage may vary, in your house somehow, but essentially it should be pretty accurate. And that's where the relative heat gain I thought would be helpful to counterbalance that. Well, if that's the heat going out, what's the heat coming in watts? And that's what the relative heat gain parameter gives us. We've got boundary conditions for NFRC. We've talked solar heat gain coefficient. I think we all know it. It's just the proportion of solar radiant energy that comes through the glass. Emissivity is the it's the long wave radiation, infrared radiation of heat, and the emittance is the part that goes through the coating, and the reflectance is what gets reflected back in. So relative heat gain, I guess I ran ahead of myself and told you about it already. It's calculated by window. It's not normally reported, but it's easily available. And I think it might be more useful than talking to the public, than talking to each other and thinking about how much heat gain we're going to get with this coating or that coating. What if I got a window this big, but this one's 4 times bigger? How much more heat am I going to get out of the bigger window if I use the same coating? Well, solar heat gain won't help you with that. You're multiplying you have a ratio, but you don't have any quantity. With the relative heat gain, you can say, well, the relative heat gain for this window is this much, here it's that much. And now you've got a sense of that, because it could be a lot of heat, or you might say, no, that's fine, I can live with that, especially when you compare it with other options. So the available window glass configurations, I've tried to simplify it. And so here's what we're talking about. We started out with only one kind of glass, right? Single pane, well, used to be other kinds of glass. We finally had float glass. We've got double pane. We're going from R1 in a single pane of glass to R2 with 2 panes of glass. Big improvement, right? 50% improvement, 50% less heat loss. However, we can do better than that. Then we came with the idea of low-E coatings and argon fill, and whether your coating is on the 2 or on the 4 doesn't matter. Your R value is the same. It's still an R4. The U factor is the same, but you will get a little more heat captured with the coating on the number 3 surface than the number 2 surface. R5, well, we just add one more room-facing coating on this double pane unit. We now go up to R5. 2 low-E coatings. Next option is to add another pane. And for now, we'll just stick with a single low-E coating. It could be on 2 or 5, but realistically, it's probably better on the 5 if you're trying to, well, it depends if your goal is maximizing solar heat gain or not. But this will bring you up to R6. So we've added an extra layer of glass, and we've gone from R5 to R6. Then we add a second low-E coating, and now we're up to R8. Triple pane coatings on 2 and 5, argon fill. Any passive house window will work with this kind of glass. Any North American window will be fabulously comfortable with this kind of glass, even if it's not in a passive house frame. And this is stuff we can buy today. We've been able to buy this for 20 years, right? This is nothing new. It's not rocket science, but these are the tools we have available to us. And if we want to go nuts, we can add one more low-E coating to the room side surface, and that brings us up to R9. So this is it. These are the options we have. And since we're not selling the R1 or the R2 option anymore, essentially there are 5 configurations that we have to work with, and we have several low-E coatings. So in my available window glass configurations table, I've ranked the data by R value, from R1 through to R9. I've also classified it by whether it's single pane or dual pane. I've included the uncoated glasses for reference, as a frame of reference, because that's the worst case scenario. In BC, we still have homes with single glazing. We still have many, many buildings with double glazed clear, and probably in other parts of Canada too. So comparing against, especially the R2 option, is relevant. So here's how our configurations stack up. I've put the pictures beside the text, and I've highlighted the low-E coatings in blue. I'm classifying them as being single silver, double silver, triple silver. That's common terminology in our industry. And I'm calling the room side coating room side coat in plain English. And so as you add more layers of glass and more coatings, you are getting higher R values, better insulation, and less heat loss. So if we look at our 2 existing glass products, we see that the double glazing made a big difference. It cut your U factor in half, cut your heat loss in half. It brought your glass temperature up from -9 to +7. Granted, this is under NFRC winter conditions, so it's -18 outside, +21 inside. And it's got quite a lot of solar heat gain. That double pane unit has almost the solar heat gain of a single pane of glass. So great for solar heat gain, but not if you're overheating. So if we now look at the R4 products, you'll see that we have high solar with the red solar heat gain coefficients and low solar. And if we do the same thing for the R5 group, the R6, we just go down, they'll fill in the whole table. What we're seeing is that we have, even though we have 3 coating options, one is the high solar is really high solar, and the other 2 are both low solar. Just 2 levels of low, below that. And you'll also, well, anyway, let's run ahead of myself. So highlighting, we look now at glass surface temperature. This table tells us that our double glazed clear glass had a glass surface temperature of 7. Well, guess what? So does an R5 window, which has 2 low-E coatings, but one of them's on the room side. And that room side low-E coating is reflecting the thermal heat in the room back into the room. So the glass stays cold. The glass temperature is cold, but that low-E coating is still keeping the heat in. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that you might think, oh, so if it's a cold surface temperature, then I'll be cold standing beside that window. And you'll be surprised to say, no, it feels warm. Why does it feel warm? Because it's got a low-E coating. Your own body heat is hitting that coating and coming back to you. So even though the glass temperature is cold, you feel warm. Nifty trick. However, that cold glass surface temperature might still contribute to a draft in the room, because the air temperature can be cold. If the air temperature is your body temperature, so you have a cold surface, the air will cool, it'll want to fall, and you get a convection current going in front of the window, and it creates a draft. The bigger the glass, the bigger the draft, the more discomfort there is. So when you look at if you look at the products that don't have a room side coating, you'll see that the glass surface temperature is quite a bit warmer. They're all at around 12 or 13 degrees. And you'll notice that even though the R8 family, which I'll call like the passive house glass family, are giving you a nice warm 17-degree room side temperature in this cold Chicago winter, when you add one more low-E coating, your glass temperature is back to where it was with a double pane unit, right? So again, is that a wise choice? Well, if you really want to have a slightly better R value from R8 to R9, knock yourself out. You're going to spend a lot of money, but you're not going to get much bang for your buck. It's not going to save you $1,000 in energy bills, and you'll probably have drafts if your windows are large. If the windows are small, it might work fine for you, right? So again, so what I'm trying to show you is the utility of this table. We don't have to know the glass thicknesses. We don't have to know the exact gap. The numbers will likely not vary with those parameters. We've rounded them to sort of group them into meaningful categories so we can understand what they are and what they do. But it's helpful for decision making. You can explain almost everything you want to about thermal comfort with reference to this chart. We can focus on the low solar heat configurations, where we see that the solar heat gain coefficients are all pretty similar across all of these, whether it's more or less low-E coatings, whether it's 2 or 3 panes of glass. We're looking at the mid to low 30s for a double silver, and mid 20s for triple silver. So this is where regardless of panes, the coatings are doing the job here on solar heat gain. And look at the relative heat gain numbers too. The relative heat gain numbers are all less than half of the double glazed clear unit. And so this tells me 2 things. Good news, it's less than half. Bad news, it's not lower. But that's the best we have. Like, we don't have anything better. So this is the limit of the glass technology with respect to comfort. And it's good to know what that limit is. If we look at the high solar gain configurations, and I guess I was going to blank out the low ones, but that's okay. We see that they're quite high. The solar heat gain coefficients are really close to those of double glazed clear glass. And look at the relative heat gain numbers. If you were to round it to the nearest 100, you're going from 600 to 500 to 500 to 500 to 400 to 400. So all of those configurations, double or triple pane, just by being high solar, just because of that one silver coating, they're all letting in a huge chunk of extra solar and are giving you pretty high relative heat gain numbers. And now we know the magnitude of the high solar versus low solar is about 50%. Your low solar products are going to put in about half as much heat as your high solar products will across the whole spectrum for every category. This is helpful stuff to know, to appreciate, right? This is what I want. Yes, focus on the high solar gain. So we've already covered that. So I think we need to be concerned about the overheating potential of high solar glass. We've seen that no matter how many layers of glass and how many coatings you have, if that first layer is a high solar layer, it's driving the solar heat gain of the rest of the assembly. It's driving the bus. So the high overheating potential of high solar gain low E glass with relative heat gain values of 70 to 80% as high as dual pane clear uncoated glass should not be underestimated. While some 80% of the heat gain through uncoated glass can radiate to the outdoors. So let's go back to the dual glazed window, the clear dual glazed window. It's bringing in a ton of solar gain, but 84% of that heat is going back out through the glass, right? It warms up your house, but that heat in your house is running back right out there. 84% of it is escaping. Now you add a low E coating, and now you're absorbing, instead of, you're going to maybe absorb only 80% of the solar heat gain of the double glazed clear, but now it's trapped in your house. Now it's turned into long wave radiation. Now it hits the window and it stays inside, and it starts building up faster and faster because it's got nowhere to go. So this is why a high solar low E window will retain and heat up a home much better than just an ordinary double glazed clear. The double glazed clear has more solar heat gain, but it can't keep it indoors. And the low E coating in a high solar window that has a low E coating keeps it trapped indoors. The most recent study of the energy rating in Canada, which was done in 2013 by RDH, included an extensive chapter on comfort that nobody paid attention to, including me. I want to shoot myself when I realized it. Because at the time I was too busy, I wasn't working at RDH, I was just involved in getting the project going and so on. And but when I studied that chapter, I realized that it showed that high solar gain windows resulted in thousands of hours of overheating discomfort per year in cities across Canada. Some better, some worse than others, but in no case was it less than thousands of hours a year of overheating. And this was in an archetype home with a 15% window to floor ratio and air conditioning in the geographic areas where air conditioning is common. So even with air conditioning, thousands of hours of overheating, and I think somehow that was missed or not really discussed as being relevant. I think it's highly relevant. So, and the low solar gain windows, on the other hand, you see charts where the high solar gain products are off the charts with discomfort, and the low solar gain products are right down at the bottom, negligible. So, and that was before we started thinking about climate change, which we'll get to in the section after this one. So if we want to think about choosing glass for occupant comfort, here's a chart from a report for NFRC when they were looking at a comfort rating for windows. And they never introduced one, but a group that worked on whether they could develop a comfort rating produced this report, and it had a nice graphic in it that I thought was helpful here. So low E coatings improve thermal comfort 3 ways. One is they can reduce the solar radiation coming in. So a low solar gain coating will do a really good job of blocking a majority of the solar heat gain coming into your home. And all the low E coatings, high or low solar, do a great job of keeping the long wave radiation in your home. Once you've heated your home, whether by the sun or your heating system, it's there. The third one is convection. If you have a cold glass surface temperature, then you've got this kind of a convective loop going and a draft in front of your window. And if you put in a low solar coating, well, actually any coating that will warm the glass surface. So in other words, not a room side coating, but if you have like a internal coating, that indoor glass surface temperature will be warmer. It will break the convective loop and lead to greater comfort. So glass options to minimize overheating. Simple. Avoid high solar gain glass. High solar gain glass. Just don't use it. Because it's only the high solar gain ones that bring in the solar heat gain. So just don't use it. There, you've solved the problem. You've already eliminated one source of overheating discomfort. For larger windows exposed to direct sunlight, you may want to even have less heat come in. Then you could choose the triple silver instead of a double silver. Each of these coatings from single to double to triple has slight differences in tint when you look at them sideways, and the visible transmittance gets darker as you add more metal particles onto the glass. So you start getting less light transmission. So there are times when you can be comfortable with a coating that isn't the best coating, but just because you want it to be brighter and you want to have more sunlight coming into your home. So there are times when you're going to want to think about that, not just your thermal comfort. So yes, if you're expecting a lot of solar heat gain, use the triple silver coating for sure. And then look at the relative heat gain numbers. They're nearly identical for all of the 2 and 3 silver low configurations, because the relative heat gain is triggered by that, how much solar heat gain you block, no matter how many layers of glass and coatings you have after that. So if you want to, what are the glass options to minimize overheating discomfort? There they are. Choose double or triple silver products. And depending on what R value you need, depending what U factor you need, you might have a building code with a prescriptive value. And that prescriptive value might be 1.60 or 1.62 or something. And you might actually need, an R5 product to get you that, or an R6 product. So you might be forced into having to use a product that has a lower U factor, and you might be forced into a room side coating that you would rather not have unless you spend more money and just get full triple glazing. But at least you know what your options are. Glass options to minimize cold discomfort. Well, simple. Choose the glass options with the warmest glass surface temperature. That's what's going to give you your comfort. Warmer glass will lead to less radiant asymmetry between windows and walls, and therefore greater occupant comfort. It will also reduce the intensity of downward cool air drafts at the indoor face of windows. The colder surface temperatures of windows with room side coatings may result in some discomfort from drafts, but not from radiant asymmetry. The low-E coating on the room side glass surface reflects your body back towards you. So there you go. Cold discomfort, warm glass surface temperature. Overheating discomfort, avoid high solar gain glass. These are simple decisions you can make. I think this should help people selling windows to help their homeowners choose better glass products in plain and simple language that they can understand without even having to talk about the ER, because it's not the ER that's the problem. It's solar heat gain that's the problem. So for some reason, I added a slide to revisit a radiant asymmetry here. So I'll just go through it. So under NFRC conditions, we have minus 18 outdoors, 21 indoors. And if we had dual pane clear glass, R2, that indoor surface temperature is 7 degrees Celsius. Not very comfortable in terms of radiant asymmetry. And that's why George here is sitting so far from the window. If you improve that glass to what was the state of the art unit 20 years ago or more, is a big improvement. We now have the glass surface temperature at 12 degrees. Big improvement if you were living with dual pane clear, and now you've got this, you'd be very happy. But you still have radiant asymmetry under these, cold climate winter conditions. Now, let's examine if you just improve that window one stage further, as we said, an R8 triple pane with coatings on 2 and 5. You now have a radiant temperature. And by the way, this 17 degrees is an NFRC number. It's not the numbers in here are not passive house numbers. These are NFRC numbers. Now you have a 17-degree radiant temperature from the glass, and you have a condition where radiant asymmetry is minimal, and most people would feel comfortable near the windows. And I guess I kept the slide because it had the pictures of the glass below. And this could be in a poster, in a window showroom, telling you why you should spend extra for that triple glazed window, because you're just going to be comfortable. So we're back to glass options for cold discomfort. We've covered that. That's it. So that's the paradigm I'm approaching this with. We've now talked about dealing with overheating discomfort, with cold discomfort. We can manage it with the glass options we already have today. Let's think about our present and future climate. We all know that our climate's warming significantly. In this particular chart, it's kind of fuzzy, but you can see how much that by the 2050s, which would be the midpoint of, this is the average for 2041 to 2070. So it's like a 2050s average. You can see there's going to be significant increase in the number of days above 30 degrees Celsius per year throughout British Columbia, not just on the coast, but inland as well. That's significant. So from my point of view, it's not in 1989 anymore. The energy rating was proposed in a 1989 paper by Intermodal Engineering, and it's been a code compliance path since 2010 National Building Code started regulating the factors in energy ratings. Since that time, Canada's climate, since the 1990s, our climate has warmed considerably, with significant warming projected in the next 2 decades and beyond. We have to rethink our assumptions about the merits of passive solar heating strategies. I really believe that. And that, I think, is important for the energy rating because it is a passive solar heating strategy that is uncontrolled in the sense that it's not designed in. You didn't design your house around passive solar heating. You just bought an appliance, plugged it into the wall of your house, and that appliance is generating heat that you can't control. And as the climate changes, you won't be able to control it either. We need to begin to consider the risks of relying on controlled, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Today, we are building and renovating buildings that will still be occupied 30, 50, 80 years from now, with windows that could last up to 50 years. Our insulating glass quality has gone up tremendously in the last several decades. And there's no reason why a good window cannot go through several rounds of glass replacement in its lifetime. So our windows are better than they used to be, and these windows are going to be around for a long time. So I checked out the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium at UBC. They have some helpful climate data that you can look up all over Canada and get all kinds of data about the changing climate. I looked at their analysis tools and the plan to adapt area, which is trying to give you a forecast of the future climate so that we might adapt and prepare for it. And so here's some screenshots that I want to show you. Because the session today is in British Columbia, I know it's being broadcast across Canada, but we're here at the Pacific chapter meeting in Vancouver. And we're looking at British Columbia, and we're looking at the data for the 2020s, which right here, it says, this is the data for the 2020s, which they describe as 2010 to 2039. This will be the average of 2010 to 2039 warming in the table for the 2020s. And we're going to compare 30 years ago to today for Victoria and Vancouver. So in the climate up to 1990, this is when the energy rating was developed. Victoria had something like maybe 20, 30 cooling degree days. And Vancouver had roughly 50. Look at the 2020s. We're in the 2020s now. We're the early part of the 2020s. Because the 2020s here are 2010 to 2039. So we're right in the middle of this. The Victoria is now having the cooling degree days that Vancouver had 30 years ago. And Vancouver, which was 50, and Vancouver, which had about 50 cooling degree days, is now at 150. Oh, okay, sorry. And now let's compare this. Let's go another decade ahead. This will be the 2050s, 2040 to 2069. So that's 30 years from the 2020s that we're in now. So Victoria, which was at roughly 30, let's give it as 30, 25 or 30 cooling degree days. Victoria is now at 150, which is where Vancouver is in the mid 2020s. And Vancouver has doubled almost from about 150 cooling degree days to almost 300. So, yeah,
So it's the only true desert in Canada, Vancouver.
Until
We have the same cooling.
until
Oh, really?
2039.
Okay. Oh, you mean Vancouver?
There's only one true desert in Canada, it's the Soyuz. And if you look at your relationship right there, Vancouver will have the same cooling demand as the Soyuz has.
Okay, there you go.
So it's not trivial.
It's not trivial, no. This is a significant warming of the climate that is coming. And the buildings that are being built today will be occupied at that time, most of them, right? We got to think about that. So now I'm comparing the 2020s to the 2050s. And again, you know, Vancouver Island is going to be at where Vancouver is today, and Vancouver is going to be where Osoyoos is. Thank you for that, Murray. So there's a 2020 study UBC conducted. They first hired RDH Building Science to look at the future climate and what can designers do today to design their buildings to still be habitable in their lifetime. What kind of mitigation strategies can we build in now in that building that can be implemented as needed without great costs, so that that building will still be habitable in that warmer climate? Two things I wanted to mention. First of all, from the introduction, just want to highlight this, that in the next 50 years, the Metro Vancouver region is predicted to experience warmer temperatures, increased summer droughts, and more intense winter precipitation. Warming temperatures will likely lead to a decrease in heating demand by almost 1/3 and an increase in cooling demand by nearly 5 times over current demands by the 2050s. Designing for future climate resilience leads to a building design that can respond to the rising temperatures while also reducing the energy consumption and carbon emissions by decreasing the demand for mechanical cooling. So we don't want to have to put in a ton of mechanical cooling in these buildings if we can make them more resilient to begin with. Maybe higher levels of insulation, provision to manage solar heat gain control. Interestingly, that if I recall correctly, when I looked at the RDH report, they found that the single most cost-effective solution that had to be a part of any future scenario was the ability to have movable exterior shading devices on buildings that you could be able to control the future solar heat gain. You'd have to do other things too, but if you didn't do the exterior shading, you wouldn't be able to solve all the problems that you will have in the future. So this is the future we're going into. Now, I have not done an exhaustive study of all the literature in this area. I'm sort of cherry picking bits of information that have come my way. But I think this is significant. You know, RDH is a very capable firm. You know, UBC is a huge landowner. They're concerned about their building stock. You know, a lot of their property has been up for development, and that funds their university. And so they have a huge stake in a building portfolio that they're owning and managing that they want to protect as a long-term asset. So, you know, these are not kindergartners. These are smart people looking ahead to the future to see what they can do to mitigate the crisis. Yeah, question here?
Yeah, just a question. Isn't it true that in Europe, for years, they've been using exterior shading already?
Yeah, the question is, isn't it true that in Europe they've been using external shading? You're right, they have been. They, especially the passive house buildings, have been using external shading structures architecturally integrated into the facade, sometimes movable, sometimes fixed, in order to help control solar heat gain. Yes.
For houses,
it's-
even landscaping.
And sure, landscape, all kinds of measures, yes, yes. But here's the thing, I don't know if we can rely on landscaping with the climate changing that way, right?
Palm tree.
Like the trees that are shading us today, will they be able to survive and grow and provide that shade in that climate 50 years from now? I don't know if it will. That's beyond my scope. So, implications of a changing climate. Solar heat gain will not be needed to reduce heating demand. Duh, climate change is taking care of that. Okay? Sorry, that was kind of rude. Solar heat gain will increasingly affect the comfort and well-being of building occupants, but in a detrimental way, as the buildings we've built and are continuing to build today cannot be easily adapted. Third point is that some recently built net zero and passive house buildings designed using current building code climate files are already overheating. And people are saying, why is that happening? We've just designed this building to the climate file the code people gave us, and it should work unless we screwed up. Well, one identified cause that is mentioned in the RDH report is that the current climate is already warmer than the building code's mandatory climate data files. They represent averages over different seasons historically, and they do not represent the climate that we're in today. So this is a problem. We have a lot of problems to solve, folks. Like windows might just be the easy part. So that's the context we're in. So now, are there some rules of thumb, some guidelines, some advice we can give people to try and manage? In this case, I focus mainly on solar heating discomfort because it's particular to the orientation to the sun, whereas cold discomfort is not. Cold discomfort is a glass surface in your home. Doesn't matter if it's the sunny side of the house or the cool side of the house, it's the glass temperature that counts. I struggled a bit with this because I thought of creating cute diagrams, and then I thought that doesn't make any sense. You can simplify it. I'm just throwing spaghetti on the wall. The magnitude of both cold and overheating comfort challenges scale with the relative size and area of glazed surfaces with respect to room size and volume. So I think we need to think about comfort not just as the window to wall ratio of the building, but you have to think about rooms. And what's the window area to floor area? That's one idea of a room, because most rooms are at least tall enough for humans. They might be taller. But other rooms like this one are very tall. And you should actually think about volume, probably, not just the area. So, you know, I don't have any metrics for that, but I do think we need to appreciate that your cold discomfort will be related to glass size, but you know what? Solar heating discomfort will be too. You could have a low solar gain product, but if it is 8 feet wide and 12 feet high, you know, and sees some sunlight during the day, God help you if it's west, you are going to have a huge heating problem, because even if the glass surface temperature is as cool as we can make it with today's technology, it still might be pumping in way too much heat than we want to manage. So we need to think about size and the relationship to the room. If it's actually a warehouse and you have that huge window, it doesn't matter. That heat can travel almost infinitely and there will be no real discomfort. But if it's a room like this, with a window that size, it might have a much different impact. So window orientation, and more specifically, direct line of sight to the sun, have a direct effect on overheating discomfort. And I thought one simple way of thinking about it is, are there rooms in your house where the sun never actually shines into the room? You never actually see the sunlight coming through the glass. Because if that's the case, you're not likely having a lot of solar heat gain through that window. So you can consider a higher solar gain product with higher visible transmittance if you want. If there is a direct line of sight, if for some part of the day the sun actually shines through the glass into the house, then you need to consider the area, size, and the duration of that solar engagement. Is it less than 2 hours a day? Is it more than 2 hours a day? What should the cutoff be before you start overheating? It's very hard to actually put a number on this, but these are the things you should be thinking about when you're thinking about discomfort and comfort. And third point is that we can use the metrics from our glass options menu that we talked about to prevent discomfort, to do what we can to prevent both cold and overheating discomfort by the choice of window glass. But we need to appreciate there's a lot we can do with those glass options, but they're limited. They still admit solar heat gain, even the lowest solar. Depending on what you're doing, it might still be more than you want. Larger effective window size. You need to appreciate that larger glass areas will have a greater impact on comfort than smaller glass areas. And it's helpful to think in terms of window to floor area ratios, to think about that at the scale of the room. A building with low or moderate window to wall ratio may still have rooms with disproportionately high window to floor ratios. Windows not exposed to direct sunlight. If the windows never see the sun, some windows will never directly be exposed to the sun because they face north or they're shaded by other buildings or outdoor architectural elements like shading devices. So sometimes, you've got windows that never actually get direct solar heat gain. On the other hand, you might have architectural features like a glass patio door onto a deck where the sun never shines in, but the sun hits the brick wall right outside the glass door, heats up that brick wall nice and hot, and that heat is now radiated in and through your windows into your space. So, there are conditions like that that can result in overheating discomfort even when the sun can't actually shine into the room. Windows exposed to direct sunlight. Windows facing west and exposed to direct sunlight for more than 2 hours a day are at significant risk of overheating discomfort. I don't know if that's true, but it kind of makes sense to me intuitively that something like up to 2 hours you could probably tolerate. Over that, you might not. But honestly, we don't have the science for that yet that I know of. I'm thinking that a window to floor ratio of up to 10% would not be a problem with high solar gain glass. It's a relatively small aperture in the wall for a size of room. And just by some calculations done in my own apartment, I thought, you know what, I think 10% would be, you wouldn't worry about solar overheating if you had a 10% window to floor ratio. You might need blinds, but you could probably manage, which is somewhere to start. Window to floor ratios then greater than 10%, then maybe that's where you trigger use of low solar gain glass. Maybe go to a double silver first, and then maybe if it's over 20 or 30%, maybe go to a triple silver. I don't know. Just a thought. Again, the relative heat gain numbers are helpful here in helping you understand relatively. If I go to triple over double, okay, that's about a 30% improvement. Well, that might be helpful, Again, for large windows, use glass with the lowest available solar heat gain coefficient and relative heat gain values. Consider the height of the window with respect to ground outside. In 2 or 3 story buildings, windows on the upper floors may have higher exposure to direct sunlight than the ground floor. And you might need to consider that you're going to use different glass in different parts of the building. You might have, there's a lot of row houses being built now that are a garage and then 3 levels above. So the garage level, the ground floor level, some of these complexes are so tight that the first 2, 3 floors aren't getting any sun. But you get to the top floor and they're probably getting a lot of sun. And the builder will put the same glass in all the windows. So, but we may need to start thinking about, well, that top floor is going to be a lot more exposed than the others. And maybe certain orientations are important. And I think it'll start becoming important to consider orientation and height and placement when we start thinking about managing comfort. Row houses on narrow lots and homes on narrow lots. So the thing with row houses is that typically the windows only face two directions. So you don't, you're kind of trapped. You might end up with an east and a west, right? Which means you should really worry about solar heat gain. It might be a north and a south, which means you might worry it in a different way. But as a rule of thumb, if you're just dealing with a builder and they just want to build row houses, I would say avoid high solar gain glass. Just selling double silver coating is a minimum, just to prevent problems and no complaints, right? For larger windows, use glass with the lowest solar heat gain values, and consider the upper floors may require more solar heat gain than the ground floor. So these are some rules of thumb. I'm not saying they apply in all cases, but it's kind of, I think if there's a way we can, as an industry, put this into words, concepts, pictures, diagrams, it might be helpful for people to think about. It might also be too soon. It might be that not enough people are suffering yet to care about it enough to ask for that information, or to compel us to provide it. But I think as an industry, we should be thinking about that. So I put together one example to show the relative heat gain, how it might influence your decision making, considering several windows that might be possible in a typical home. And I'm just reiterating here that in addition to solar heat gain, we can use the relative heat gain to help us compute and compare the relative magnitude of solar energy captured by windows and doors of various sizes, something we can't do easily with solar heat gain. By the way, one of the audiences for this presentation is architects. I'm going to make it available as something I promised to do for somebody. And so I wanted this to be kind of a self-explanatory content. So that's why I run ahead and talked about things that are now in my text, because I wanted this information to be there for the other audience as well. So, Jeff Baker and I started working on an example like this for the A440.3 standard, where we felt it needed some guidance on solar heat gain. When Jeff and I discussed it, we were using the solar heat gain coefficient for these examples, but it was kind of unsatisfactory because we had to assume some quantity of heat that comes out per unit area of a window, which we would call X. And you would multiply the solar heat gain times X of these different situations, larger windows versus smaller windows, and try to find a way of helping to explain why a larger window might need a lower solar heat gain coefficient. And I've reworked the example using relative heat gain numbers. So here I've got the 3 relative heat gain numbers from the table. I'm not sure which, I think I used the double pane products with 1 low coating for this example. And so I put in 450 watts per square meter for the high solar heat gain, 260 for the medium, and 200 for the low. And here's a window that's 16 square feet. This could be a small bedroom window in somebody's home. That's like a 4x4 foot, could be a slider. And the window to wall ratio, in this case, is 13%. And your relative heat gain with a high solar gain is 670, medium is about 390, and low is about 300. Honestly, I think it's helpful to round these to the nearest 100 to really help people grasp it. But now, if you had a large bedroom window, so this was the kid's bedroom on A, B might be the master bedroom. You've now got a 4x8 window or its equivalent, twice the square footage. You now see that quite a bit more heat is involved here. Then you might have a living room where you've got a view window. Basically, we just made it 3 times bigger than A, just to keep things simple. And then what if you had a sun deck or balcony sliding door? This one turned out to be 63 square feet, and here's where we're at. But what this shows you immediately is you're looking at around 700 watts per hour coming in through A with the high solar gain product, 1300 with B, 2000 with C, and 2700 with D. So if you had the same glass in all these windows, you'd probably be more comfortable in rooms A and B than C and D, but it depends on the size of the room. If the sliding door opens up to a big, great room, it might not be a problem. If it doesn't face west or south, it might not be a problem. But it just shows you the magnitude of the heat coming in. And it also shows you that even if you choose the lowest solar gain product we have, that patio door is still going to be bringing in around 1,100, 1,200 watts per watts of energy per hour, which is not insignificant. So again, will examples like this be persuasive? Will they help people? I don't know. Again, I'm just taking stuff we have and seeing if this will help us with the conversation. And at this point, I'm not saying that it will, but I think the idea of an archetype chart or a configuration chart is a real helpful one. I think some work could be done to make sure that those numbers are good for the variety of single, double, triple silver coatings in the marketplace. I think that would be a helpful chart for the discussion, regardless what else we do. But I think we do need a more nuanced discussion about the future and about solar heat gain and cold discomfort. And hopefully this takes us a step in that direction. Any comments? Yes.
I have a question. Is there any methodology of economy efficiency analysis of existing window system to the house versus like the new system to be not different, but potentially to be installed in the house, like in like the cost efficiency for like spending for the HVAC.
In other words, is there a way of coming up with how much heat comes through the windows for the purposes of sizing mechanical system?
Not really how much will it cost, like how much will you spend less or?
Oh, I see. How much will you spend less or
But
cost?
the whole building, not just the one room one. But the whole building.
I don't know if I can answer that question, but here's some discussions that are happening in BC. We have step code builders working in an integrated design team environment to design, let's say, a step 4 or step 5 home. And so they're trying to work together to, come up with the most economical package that will satisfy the architectural desires and also address the comfort and energy needs. And so, HOT 2000 is a program they use to evaluate energy performance, but it doesn't help you figure out which parts of the house are going to need air conditioning and how much. So the energy advisors who do that work use another standard, I think it is a CSA standard, for sizing heating equipment. And they can take inputs like the insulation levels of the home and the orientation and other factors and the window performance, and they can come up with what cooling demand they will have and heating demand they will have in different parts of a house in order to help to design the mechanical system. So I think the consultants who do that kind of work could probably be going a step in the direction you're talking about, is to try and evaluate if you could do that for an existing house, and then you could do that same exercise for an improved set of windows or other renovations, then there might be a way of putting together a budget for the renovations that would be needed, that would bring you the cost numbers, right? But I don't think there's anything that is available today to do that. But it is the kind of thing people are struggling with now as they're trying to design step code homes, and they're also trying to, they're aware of discomfort issues, and they're trying to mitigate discomfort issues at the design stage using the available tools they have.
And you can do the like existing frame and like management to install, but we can we have a number of how much we spend on that.
Exactly. Yeah.
How much they will be spending on the installation of.
So I think we have tools that can do that. The question is, at this point, is there a market to pay the consultants to do that kind of work, right? And also how accurate and how I think there is some question as to whether the different standards and tools they use are actually measuring exactly the same things or not. But they're doing the best they can with what they have available at the moment. Other question or comment?
Al, if I can just add a little bit more to that.
Sure.
There's two Excel calculators that I've seen. One was a beta calculator through the city of Vancouver that was dealing with some of the economics of how you go from step 3 to step 4 to step 5, and they've got some of the metrics baked into that, so you can kind of see how the price changes with that. And then on the retrofit side, although it doesn't deal with the economics of it, the EnterFit program, or the sheet they've added to PHPP, is another way of kind of seeing how some of those changes could be made. There's some way to kind of see that. But currently, those are the only two resources I've run into that kind of deal with both the economics of that improvement, or even like for renovation, what that improvement could look like on the total bill. But it's a fair bit of input. It's the truth of it.
Very.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I got some other comments too. I'll split it up into two. It's just on that question. BC's already declared a code for existing buildings for 2024. We've also appended to that a public announcement that the expectation is at a certain level of capital renewals or flood restoration work, or anything that affects significantly the cost of ownership of that home existing. There's going to be an expectation for an improvement in energy. The ideal is they would like to parallel ultimately go on net zero remediated homes, recognizing that all new homes going to net zero is going to have 5% of a bump on 40% of the energy question in BC. You know, the other 35% of the impact on net carbon energy, if they're related, it's going to come from what we do with existing buildings. So it's not really the answer to that question. It's just that there is going to be something, and the halo to that is at step 5 net zero in new construction. You can't use the typical HUT 2000 energy modeling programs because they're a little bit tainted in that they sort of understate some things and overstate some things to derive an incentive to work towards what's wanted. That's the bones of a home first and then fine tuning. I mean, you can get to step 3 right now by just building the house you do and putting a drain water heat recovery about Home Depot, and you make your numbers. So they downplay this and that. So at the higher levels, and this to come back to that point, you're really relying on Teddy's and total energy usage intensities in your calculated mechanical loads. So I think we can't answer the question as to what that's going to be, but you can be assured that it's going to go to metrics. And there's going to have to be tools, Adrian, like you're talking about, et cetera, that are going to have to drive a method that we push that down. So that's not the answer, but it will be an answer, and it will likely take that direction. That's where we found our truth in answer as it stands right now. And I really like your comments about passive housing. You're starting to chase marginal change that can triple the cost of the building enclosure for 2% gain. And is it really targeting total comfort when you're relying on all that passive? And maybe I'll leave that out there as a whole thing, and then let everybody else go. I do have some interesting comments. Before I do that, though, round of applause. And that was amazing, and I just shaking my head up and down. I'm nodding and agreeing with all of that. You're onto something really big here, and I'd like to add a couple more things. But personally,
Jonathan, did you?
Yeah, well, I mean, Al's very bad discussion. I mean, anyone who's gone to a West Vancouver home with those glass boxes overlooking the water know that they can't go in the room from July to September because it's way too hot. You know, they can put in as many vents as they want, the ceiling pump the AC, and it's still melt the inside. So I think it's a major discussion. The only thing is, you know, we involve consulting on custom homes and stuff where the energy model, whether they're carrying some of the beliefs from lead and passive house into the step code, they seem so resistant to the idea that solar heat gain isn't just free energy. You know, they're just, well, look, we need a high solar heat gain. There's a two-part problem with that. One, the U value is expected to be really low, and it's a direct relation, you know, not at all, but overarching a low U value gives you a lower solar heat gain. So we're just facing opposition, I think, from the designers, from those that are, you know, saying, well, this is what I want. Whether unless you're a manufacturer, no, a consultant, we're like talking to deaf ears that won't listen. And just wondering what kind of options we have at our disposal to just, because the data, like I can say, look, this data is old. And they're like, yeah, I agree, but this is what I want. It's like, you gotta warm up to what I'm asking, or I'm gonna take you to this West Vancouver home and I'll be sitting here in July and then you wake up.
I think that's a big problem, is the energy advisors have not been well trained on Windows. I think Enercan has done a crappy job, Enercan, in training energy advisors about Windows. They're still using the inputs from the 1980s because they're too lazy to look up the window values for a window, and they'll plunk in vinyl frame, I think it's a this glass, and they're building an energy model around it and telling you they need more solar heating, right?
And it
So-
goes deeper than that, though, because the energy advisor is working off of HOT 2000, which is ill-equipped to deal with net zero. And in fact, under the step code, you can't use HOT 2000 or traditional energy advisor. It says you have to use an energy modeler and answer the metrics. So we recognize that it's a shortcut. It's just a stopgap while we get to step 5.
Okay,
Right, but you only got
Yeah.
a 0% increase, 10% increase, 20% increase for December at step 3. It doesn't get serious till you get to step 4, 40%, and then step 5 at 110% improvement. Really, we're warming up with nothing. We're warming up, getting nowhere that makes an impact. And so now I'm playing around with that higher level in there, just throw away HOT 2000 and seriously focus on what an energy modeler needs to be and how we need to address these metrics and provide those tools and ask those questions and consider the retrofit. And then a couple other things that I'm going to ask you to maybe embrace or at least think about as an extension here.
I think we really need guidance. I think our industry should create a document aimed at energy advisors, aimed at builders, everyone. Is that, do not look at high solar heat gain as the solution to your energy problems, because of the comfort problems that it will create.
So
Because-
I built one 20 kilometers away from the only true desert in Canada, at 3,000 feet, so my nighttime daytime switch is out of control. And then I got a mountain on the south side, so in the winter I get no free heat out of the thing. And the river's on the south side of that, so I got all my glazing on the exact wrong side in the worst possible situation in Canada. And at the end of the day, everything we talked about here, we considered and a couple other things. And we ended up with 366 Lamy triple glazed passive house rated cascade windows in there because of all the things you're talking about. We realized that it was about cooling load. When you get to those extremes, and if that's going to be Vancouver by 2050, then exactly what we came to the discovery of there is what's going to apply to basically all your major metropolitan areas in Canada. And you're going to be chasing your cooling load, not your heating load. And the solar heat gain coefficient will become a non-conversation piece. And then, okay, I'll just throw them in there. The other couple of things I want you to consider, you talk about the convection that can happen when we cool that inner surface, and obviously 366 Lamy passive houses is going to be subject to that kind of thing. We've overwhelmed that because the heating sources you're going to be using are heat pump technologies. And we don't want to put big, lazy, single atmosphere ventilation and ducting for those systems. It's expensive to install. We've gone to high velocity systems, and we're entertaining something that isn't recognized in typical energy design or codes, and that's circulation. The circulation of air is something that is unaffected in traditional design. It's silent in the building codes, but we already knew that. In the old days, we stuck heat registers under windows. So why can't you take high velocity, heat pump driven distribution of thermal comfort in there and drive it at your glazing surfaces and temper that? So I think we have to, what's old is new, I think we have to revisit that. And then the other thing I want to point out too is this assumption about cooling. 10, 15 years ago, I started talking about in my series throughout all of British Columbia. So we were doing Fort St. John, we're doing Prince George, we're doing everything. I stood up on those podiums and said, you're all going to be putting heat pumps in. Oh, laughing at me. Not a chance that they would embrace putting heat pumps in. Well, now 71% of homes built at the Prince George line and north are all being built new houses with heat pumps. Predominantly driven by the fact that people like the cooling once they taste it. And then I just leave you with a final thought. How many people in this room, old group like me, 25 years ago had air conditioning in your vehicle, paid the option on it? How many do we have it now? How many would buy a car without air conditioning today?
Nobody.
Yes, so I think that we go to heat pump technologies, there's no clawing back from that. Our utility companies are entrenched in that philosophy right now. And once people taste cooling, I don't think you're gonna be able to go without cooling. And then to all of your arguments in here, it's gonna be the cooling mode that we have to chase. So I think it's death to high solar heat gain anyway. And I would remind you of BC, under part 9, you can't use the solar heat gain as part of your package. They opted out of that.
That's good to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, they
Two
said
more.
because if you got a mountain like I've got, it shadows the house and you're expecting the solar heat gain, you can't rely on it because there's nothing to catch that in design or construction. So site orientation, all the rest of that, the code doesn't control. So this goes back 8, 9 years here in BC. They said, no, that's solar heat gain.
Two more questions, Al, in the back. Yeah.
I sell windows. I'm from West Coast Windows, and I'm doing signal residential. We get energy advisors all the time, with now step code 3, 4, and 5 coming through. And I've been working with this, and what I'm trying to do is trade-offs. Going back to the client, telling them, get your energy advisor to, trade off. Maybe we can do a better U value, and we can lower the solar heat gain. Because, we're getting silly things like 50% solar heat gain, but they want a 1.6 window. It's like, what is this? Makes no sense. So, you can get around it, and you have to go back, and I'll tell customers in my showroom, I'll say, I'm not going to sell you this because you're going to overheat. So I just won't do the project unless you want to get your energy advisor to sign a disclaimer saying, I'll replace all the glass in 2 years. So, that's ridiculous, obviously, but the client realizes, wow, this guy's serious. He won't do it. And if they want my windows, go back and negotiate. And I can honestly say it's been successful 80% of the time. Somebody who came in at 0.35, let me put in 0.26 windows. So just got asked.
Go ahead.
My name is Rita Faber Windows. Similar point to I think what you were saying earlier about the energy advisors and trying to find the numbers. The grant with the government right now, the $5,000 does give you the energy advisor to do the pre-existing home evaluation.
Right. Yeah.
To run the numbers, and then if you ask them, I think it's $100 more, they will give you what you want to put in, and you can replace the numbers with the new upgrade windows or heating pumps, and they'll give you a number before you decide to place the windows.
To that point, though, December becomes mandatory that all houses in BC are step code 3, which is a net 20% improvement on energy. It's not
New home or
all new
all new homes in British Columbia built, but
No, this is for reno.
Retrofit.
it's the same incentives, right?
No, greener
Heat
homes
pump
are
technology.
for retro.
But they were relying on the utilities to deliver on this. We're doing the education for it, so it's jumping between
No,
renovation
this
and.
is just to let your customers know that that's available, so that, because some people, because of the grant, you can still put in double glazed windows, because you would still get 150 back.
Right.
You can go to $250 and then $100 from BC Hydro and get $350 if you just did a couple bit of numbers.
I agree, but I'm just saying it's step 3. Who cares? It's not really a great way to approach it, but it doesn't have a big impact on what you're delivering if you're only looking at 20% net improvement in home. But if somebody's going in and doing a deep energy retrofit on an existing home, step 5, and they're relying on Hot 2000 and those grants, it won't work, right?
No, but I think she's talking about the Greener Homes program, which is just
Specifically,
a targeted improvements like window replacement. roof
Different Fortis BCs and
I get all of those. I'm just saying that when you're trying to go from a 1980 based 2x6 photograph paint, probably it's not a home.
No, more if I'm talking about if you're trying to get your customers to understand what double glaze and triple glaze is, because some people you introduce triple glaze and they're like, we'll never need it, and that's not true. And sometimes you have to ask them why they want to choose windows, and sometimes it's okay to have double glaze in the backyard with a giant overhang. You won't have to worry about it, but if it's front facing, things like that, now you don't have to be particular on double glaze the whole house. You can choose on exactly which window requires what.
And I'm not negating or questioning any of that. I'm just saying that this whole thing about a step code or these marginal improvements in a retrofit, at the end of the day, they're going to have some impact on the operating costs and the comfort in the house. But my fear is we're teaching habits, and if you try and scale what we do right now in retrofit, and with a goal of getting to net zero or beyond, all those things that they're teaching us to do that work have to be completely revisited.
But you can't force somebody to change their mind right away. You
Not-
have to slowly.
I'm not saying, that's not my point. My point is, it's the short term of a step forward and a phased approach towards greater energy efficiency. We can still do more than what we do right now, and ultimately helps us work for the wrong reasons anyway. It's when you get to the upper levels in the energy thing, that all of these things that are being promoted right now don't make any sense. They just drive you tremendous expense.
We've got another.
Basically, you know, I think your point is well taken, though, that there is a way to work with an energy advisor to upgrade a window. And that's a valid point. I know you're saying systemically in the big scheme of things, that's not relevant, but that's, she's talking about practical issues these guys can deal with, not the societal problem.
I agree. I'm just afraid that we're heading down a path that isn't going to give us any tools and a full sense of hope that we can go the next step. And we got a government at a federal level that made us sign off that everything new and retrofit is going to have to be net zero by 2030. Whether that happens or not, that's what they're entrenched in. So we got 6 years before designs on retrofit and that have to account to this, not this. And everything we're learning in here is not helpful if you're trying to go here.
Yeah.
You got to throw away everything we know about retrofit new construction, start again, if you're going to find efficiency. Again, to this point, you question the validity of high solar heat, but right now, it's the panacea, right? Free heat.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah,
Well, I
next
think
one.
the biggest, I mean, everybody in this room kind of knows what we're talking about when it comes to, you know, window thermal performance, efficiency, stuff like that. But I can guarantee you, if you walk up to, you know, any average person outside this room and ask them what defines, you know, a good window, their thought process is still going to be around what we've been telling them for the last 30 years, which is keeping heat in, keeping cold out. And that's what their mindset is driving them towards right now. So we're fighting a battle that we've been training, you know, the consumer for 30 years to think about, I want, you know, to use that side to keep my heating costs down and stuff. Now we're having to completely shift that thinking on its side and expect that to catch up. And I think that's where the fight comes in, is that the consumer thinks the window is designed to keep heat in. And we're realizing that the window really needs to be designed to keep temperature changes out of the state, whether that be heat or cold. It's not just a one or the other or one stop, just heat. It's a factor of both. And I think that's where it starts, is to educate them and everything that they're getting exposed to, whether that be marketing or whatnot. But that's the only way the consumer and then the energy advisors they're hiring and whoever else is going to get them, the architect's going to forward that shift happens. And right now, I don't see it happening in the average person that I talk to. So,
Well, and this is where I think we need to perhaps change the conversation and start talking about comfort, not energy, and address people about what's comfortable and uncomfortable about the windows in your home or homes you've lived in. And I'm sure everybody will remember something that was uncomfortable, too cold, too hot, and maybe that's the way to get in. I know I heard one salesperson say years ago, it's a lot easier to sell comfort than energy, in the sense that energy, schmenergy, you know, like I'm comfortable in my own, well, but you know, the person doesn't, maybe they don't care about energy, just want new windows. But if you can tell them how they can be more comfortable, you know the story. It's like the air conditioning in the car. Once you've had it, would you want to live without it? You know, if you've actually had windows that didn't overheat, wouldn't you want that? And people just might not realize that there's anything you can do about that. So anyway, I think, yes, I think we do need to change the discussion. Let's get to the others. Yes.
Derek, I think, sorry.
Oh, Derek, sorry.
You know, we've been successful legislating new values. There's, you know, City of Vancouver, provincial government legislation. Why not solar heat bill? Cap it at 25.25, right? It's be the part of the Energy Efficiency Act. That would simplify things pretty quickly, and everybody will play by those rules, hopefully, and problems seemingly may go away.
You know, if it was only so simple, you know, then there's a whole industry of people who have been trained to work and think in certain directions. And the processes for putting something like an energy regulation are not simple, right? I mean, if you could get the people who can make those decisions to make the right decision, you might want to do something like that. But I'm not, it's just not very easy to get to that point.
Well, we're not exactly a followers of this approach, kind of lead the pack. You know, it's, we have certain impact on those decision makers. They consulted us, and we were involved personally in market studies. So perhaps, you know, love should start. That's what the organization that we're part of is all about. Right?
Well, and this is where we want to get this conversation going, right? This is, you know, this is my first sort of step in this direction. Let's try and define what we think is important here, and get some critical feedback and build a case and see how we can advance this level of understanding and start challenging some of the prevalent beliefs.
Okay, over here.
Just touch on a couple of those comments. Like, isn't the big issue here, like, utility companies are driving all this. All the marketing we see, like, it's all about energy, conserve energy, and all the grants that have happened in the last 15 years have all been derived from ER rating, U value, and that's it. And so people are just on this one track thing because that's being incentivized. And who has the big budgets to market what's considered like what's optimal? It's like it's Fortis, it's hydro, and they're marketing all this stuff at the trade shows, this and that about no energy loss, no energy. There's no talk from them about what you were saying, this whole idea of like comfort regulation, right? And so that's the missing piece, because this is all the people are that, and those are the people like that end up lobbying government regulation. Because what over here is saying, yeah, it's pretty simple, like regulate some sort of solar heat gain thing in the code and off you go. But they're not really interested because it's all about heating degree days, cooling degree days. What's the math on energy consumption? That's it, right?
A lot of times I think it has to do with who has their ear. But there's a couple groups that we participated in that I think have made substantial impact with those guys. Like I know HPSC here in the Lower Mainland has been working on some of the retrofit side. I think they do listen to those groups. Essentially, whoever's tapped to execute for them. Difficulty I have found with those groups is essentially steering in a way that it is you don't get off track. That we have a pretty clear focus, and I want to kind of reiterate my point earlier that I personally believe the BC chapter has that ability for us to create a pretty clear line of advocacy for really important points. That if we do that, I do firmly believe that our utility companies and the couple people that we've been connected to at the province, the government level, would be happy to listen and would be, I mean, not necessarily that they would change it, but they would certainly consider it.
But they're not inherently incentivized to, they're inherently incentivized for less energy consumption so they can sell it off grid, off market, right? Like
you think that, but that's not always their decision making. To be fair, like
none of
stuff
the
that
rebates have reflected that, right? It's all been based on the last 15 years, like ER, which is a pretty flawed metric. It's just taking really general terms, right? ER, value, right? Like the whole Energy Star zone 1, 2, 3, it's based on ER.
I agree, and I think what I see a lot is federal government essentially marching those orders down. That's been pretty a clear line of sight, and we have been having conversations about that from provincial federals that we probably need to reconsider a little bit, at least have that conversation. Yeah, again, I'm not suggesting that there is a solution that we would make here at the BC level that would make the federal impact, but we can certainly create clear criteria on what we as an industry see on that. And I have seen that to be successful.
Back in Cora.
Are you trying to get people to now, instead of using old data, like what's the highest base score, instead of like the weatherman, like predicting what it's going to be and using those models? For getting people to be more interested. Just because like you showed us like 30 years from now, it's going to get the cost. And using that model would be better than using 30 years ago past, like, better off, I would think, but then that's not what you do.
Well, I think that discourse is already happening. I mean, you've got, UBC commissioned this report, well aware of that, right? And you've got people in the design community, some of them are appreciating that this is a problem and that we need to start changing our targets and designing for a different climate. It's just that the building code process kind of lags behind all of the, new thinking. So it could take 1 or 2 code cycles, easily 2 code cycles before this kind of a change actually starts getting into the code. So
About that. Yeah.
John?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sure anyone involved in any kind of thermal modeling is gonna add their voice to, go to energy modelers or any advisors share, not only these findings, I think it's current data, not just, projected data, but just for the window manufacturers, a warning, like my experience has been when I say, look, what you're asking for is not comfortable, stable, but also, you want a really low U value, so I get that energy, they want a high sleep gain. The response I'm getting is like, well, I guess I'm just gonna get a passive house window. And their passive house does not follow the same metrics or modeling that we have in North America. And whether it's intentional, nefarious, or just lack of knowledge of people who will sell windows, in other parts of the world, there's a market to take up those when you say, well, I'm not gonna sell it to you. There's someone right behind you to take it. So if you're resistant to getting on board, I would get on board with Al and everyone to share this, because they'll take up the market real quick.
So to speak to that, we did have BC or a Pacific Regional Committee conversation specifically about that translation between how you would do the energy modeling for Passive House 2 in an FRC related data.
So that it's in line with North American standards.
There is a guideline that I believe REH worked on. That we could
But
reference.
energy models have no clue, right? Our
I know.
doesn't care. He's like, oh, it hits what I want. Great, push it through.
Yeah, and I think this advocates for, we need training. We need to provide some guidance for the energy modelers.
But
and
maybe,
really-
maybe you could work with us and help us to get the message to the energy advisor community. Because they have, to be fair, NRCan has not given them adequate training. Even their basic training doesn't cover the inputs to the glass properly.
Yeah.
And many of them are not using the right input methods even. So, if there's a way that we can get to them through Casey and other things, like, that's what I think we need to do.
In the back,
How do you move anything forward? It just says the high-rise market.
with a lot of patience.
All of
Patience and persistence, yeah, exactly.
Slowly but surely.
Yeah.
And a big sign on the wall that says, hey, bash your head here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, just continue to do it over and over.
Just because the aluminum market for the high-rise, they're now, energy efficiency is not needed. They try to put as much as they can, but because the frames are all metal, you can't get to the levels of vinyl or fiberglass. But then there's this whole non-combustible, so it's trying to help them understand that there's other ways to make it more fire safe and just go with thermal breaking between 2 aluminum frames.
I think that's an amazing example of bashing your head against the wall. That is a 15-year project, getting the non-combustible portion incorporated into the industry. And that is a great example of that portion of the industry has been a real frustration. And it was a lot of effort by many parties getting that language incorporated in NBC. So a 15-year project.
Not there yet.
Not yet there yet.
Yeah.
Quite.
But I did see an approval from Vancouver last week for an exemption for non-combustible.
Really?
I did.
Oh, on a project?
Yeah.
Wow, there you go. Talk to him.
Yeah, I will.
Anyway, I don't know if
Okay,
we're
I'll keep
managing
going.
time.
Yep,
It's up to
yep,
you
we'll
guys.
keep going.
Yeah.
I'll go. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I got so many things I'd like to say about that whole conversation. The first one is I want to bet Murray dinner that there's no existing building code in 2024. That's not gonna happen.
I want to double on that.
Because it does exist.
It exists, but it won't be in place. I participated in a lot of those conversations about the existing building code and talking about the energy performance and net zero homes for existing buildings. And it was an interesting comment that I heard throughout that the entire, there was 4 or 5 meetings. It'll be cheaper to knock the house down and start over again.
That is very true.
Yeah.
There's gonna be no economy because the houses don't max.
No, I've got a 1978 custom build.
And that's the big issue is the
I
value.
can knock it down and build it brand new and do it cheaper than trying to bring that home up to a net zero level. Or I could load the yard with solar
You can do a
panels. I
bottle of
guess.
scotch at my house.
Yeah, there's so many other things I want to talk about there, but we're going to talk about Fenestration Canada. I think most in the room are members. We might have a couple that are non-members that we obviously want to try and attract. So I just want to talk a little bit about who we are, what we do, because even the members oftentimes send us their check, which we're very grateful for, but we never hear from them again. They don't participate, they're not involved, they're not engaged. And I think as members, you need to look at that and you need to find ways to engage your company with our association or whatever association you're affiliated to get the best bang for your buck. So I want to talk about what we do. So nationwide industry, of course, we've got over 200 members now, I think 230-ish, somewhere in there. So we've seen some pretty good growth actually through the last couple of years. Has relationships with a wide range of government, stakeholder groups, suppliers, and other associations in Canada and in the States. And we've really started to grow that sort of network of who we're dealing with. We recently became an affiliate partner with RAIC, which is the Royal Architects Institute of Canada. Al's done some great work with them. He just recorded a session for their spring conference. It's been a great relationship so far, and we hope to expand that to work with architects across the country. And it was one of the things that Al always said as we were talking with these people is we want to tell you what you know that you don't know. How does that go again?
We want to tell you what you don't know that you don't know.
That's right. Yeah, something to that effect, because they need some help to understand us. And then we also work with groups like CHBA, FGIA. We do some things with them. Casey, I'm a member with the Association for Energy Advisors. If you want to talk to some guys that don't understand windows, boy, there's a great group to talk with. So I'm trying to help them to understand the challenges that we face, and it's not just a 0.65 solar heat gain and everybody's happy, right? So that's ongoing. We employ 5 full-time people that are Fenestration Canada employees that provide you convenient access to information, networking, resources, and support, which is something that I really want to drive home, the support part of it that we can do for you. We actively participate in a broad range of internal and external committees, ensuring we're participating in those discussions that will impact the industry and ensure that all of our voices are heard. So if you're a member, we're talking for you. So you want to make sure that you're engaged with us, telling us what it is you want us to say. Fenestration Canada is committed to the growth of our membership, ensuring we maintain strong input from all regions while supporting members at the local level. We're no longer the old men's club in Ontario. And for years, even when I was, I go back to Fenestration BC for many years, we thought that Fenestration Canada was really Fenestration Ontario. And at the time it really was. But that has really changed over the last 6, 7, 8 years. So a diverse value of offerings, all members have one voice no matter your size or commitment. So any member can participate at any level that they choose. You can be all in, participating in committees and on task groups. You can sit on the sidelines and just send us your check, which we really appreciate, or you can lie somewhere in between, right? Many active committees working on everything from membership to tech services. We have a group that would interest you. Tech services committee that is really high level, technical, obviously, based on its name, you get that. That's looking at these things like code changes and what's happening down the road so that we can prepare the industry. We've got education committees, we've got a membership committee, we've got, who else do we have?
Oh, yeah.
You're going to talk about it. So Steph's going to give us a bit more on that. We have quite a number of committees that would probably interest something that you have interest in the industry. Again, partnerships, CFIB, RAIC, CHBA, CSA Passive House, WDMA, Enercansonic. So we're well connected. We have a lot of great relationships. And something that a lot of our members don't realize that as soon as you join us, you become a member of CFIB, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, which is a $600 bill if you go and join them independently from us. They have a lot of great people that can help you in your business decisions. If you have HR people, they need to be connected to these guys. They have a lot of really brilliant people that can help you on the business side of what you do. So, just things that are benefits in our value offering. Technical department, Al and myself, like I say, I've been with FenCan for a year now. Al's probably 2 years, I think, somewhere in there. Between us, we've got over 60 years of industry experience. So we've been around the block a few times, and we can help you out with a lot of things that maybe you don't understand, you need some help on, support on something. So don't hesitate to give us a call. We also launched an online forum, Q&A forum. So if you're a member, you can post questions, you can go in and read questions and answers. You can pose an answer to a question. It's a really great forum. So we really encourage you that if you haven't seen it, go to our website. It's under tech department, I think, if I'm not mistaken, technical. And it's the Q&A forum. Just log in, you can go in and see what's going on and post questions. And we monitor it live. Well, not live, but we monitor it. So if we see a question, we get that question right away and we'll jump on it and dig into it for you. Activity, again, committees, task groups working on a broad range of projects. We have installation training program for our FIT certification for installers. That's something that Adrian is a big part of and does a lot of the work on development. We're working with a number of different groups and training partners. Thank you, Murray. His company is part of that group. On-site water penetration task group. So we just launched a new task group that is going to look at the challenges with on-site air and water penetration testing. We've got about 22 industry experts that are involved, and we're going to be creating some things like do's and don'ts, some best practices. We're going to look at what's going on in that industry right now and try and find what the challenges are to help those companies that are faced with that challenge. And I've done lots of them, as I'm sure many of you guys have, but it's a challenging industry. Solar heat gain, Al talked about that. We're definitely going to be expanding and enhancing that conversation. Something that somebody mentioned about getting to the government. BC obviously understands that there is a challenge with high solar gain products. They dropped the ER. I mean, that's a key sign right there that they get it. They've also there's groups or there's people at building standards that I've been talking with. They understand that there's some challenges there, and they're open to having some conversations with us to see what we can do and what we can share from our experiences and the science behind it to help them understand the challenges with high solar gain products. I mentioned RAIC, which Al's session will come out in June. We can do a presentation for your company on something specific. We've got one signed up right now for July, where Al's going to be doing a session on the changes that are in the NBC 2020. Glass design group, there was a collaboration between FGIA and NBC and FenMan and Fenestration Canada to look at glass design. A bit stalled, but it'll come back. Tech Talks, you're probably familiar with that. That's our online education sessions that we do, usually one a month. We fell off over the winter. We're gonna start ramping those back up again. So always looking for good topics there. Our AGM conference this year coming to Charlottetown, PEI. Jonathan's going to join us to do a presentation. Really appreciate that. That's fantastic. The Windor Trade Show is in Montreal this year, so that's in November. Definitely want to see you there. And then the chapter meetings every month. There's BC, the Prairies, Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada that have chapters that do those meetings. And then we're going to be doing more of this now that things have opened up. Thank heavens. Hopefully they stay open. We're going to do more of this where we can get people face to face, talk about what's going on, and try and help you guys. Chapter growth, I wanted to just touch on that. We've seen a lot of growth in all the regions. We're committed to that growth. We're the National Window and Door Association, and we're committed to representing as many industry participants as we can. So always looking for new members. So if you know anybody that's not a member, or if you're not a member, we need you aboard. We need you to tell them to come and see us and join us. And the more voices we have, the broader scope of the members we have, the better it is for everybody. A great example, I joined Fenestration Canada about 7 years ago, I think. Sat in the background on the board, worked my way through the board, ended up being president for almost a couple of years. back 6 years ago, I think it was, they had the AGM in Vancouver. And I had some great conversations with the current president and the vice president at the time, and they said, look, we need to do something in BC. BC is a huge market. We drive, somebody mentioned that we're the ones driving the bus here when it comes to what our industry is doing. They just look across the country and they look to us to see how these changes are being handled. We had 4 members at the time, and now we're plus 20. And we aim to turn that to 40 as soon as we can. So we want to have a bigger representation across the country, but in BC, because again, I think Derek said, we're driving the bus, I think, right? Like I said, we're a leader in that development. We have more passive house products built in BC than any other province. High performance product lines that are being developed here that we're not seeing we're not seeing as many across the country. And that's key to getting their input in the growth of Fenestration Canada. We're confident we can double that membership, which is what we're doing. So we want you to join us and stay ahead of that curve. So that's all I've got, but I did want to talk a little bit about, there's manufacturers here, obviously, of products. I want to talk a little bit about the challenge faced with finding good people. Everybody, I'm sure, is faced with that challenge right now. I just want to introduce a very good friend of mine here, Mr. Doug Thompson. He was with me at West Tech for almost 20 years. And Doug's done production on the floor. He was production manager. He was production administrator. He did purchasing. He worked as my assistant when I was the technical director there. Costing. What haven't you done, Doug? Great. Doug's looking for work. So you might want to give him your information if you want a really top-notch employee. All right, Steph, I think you've got something to say.
Yeah, I won't need slides.
No? Okay.
Yeah, so thanks, Sarah. You covered it pretty much. Just want to specify why we have chapters. So we started with, as Terry said, like the regional involvement was not strong enough. So we created regional groups, regional committees, and those committees grew. And at this point now, that's why we have chapters, because we, as someone mentioned here, like, how is it you do to get to some changes? How can we get there? And the one thing I'd say is, because of those chapters and because of what we can do with those chapters, it really gives us, I think, a stronger voice in all the associations that we work with. But being able to say that, listen, we're a national organization, but we also do have regional chapters. And, you know, like maybe this chapter has a certain opinion on a certain issue, and maybe the Quebec one has a different opinion, and that's fine. Now having chapters, we can tell the government nationally and provincially and regionally, we can let them know this is what's happening here, this is what's happening there, and this is what we think should happen. Or, you know what, like those 3 groups, those 5 groups, they can't agree, but they agree on this specific thing. And then when we can all line up on one topic, then it's easier to go to the government or to go to whoever would make a decision and to really make a case for it. And this is how we get stronger. And it's because we have, you know, meetings like this where we didn't have enough chairs. We have this online. We're able to go and get that information back. And the discussion that we had today is just, you know, who knows where that takes us in 5-10 years. Hopefully less than that, but probably 5-10 years. But yeah, so, you know, the only thing I want to say, you know, thanks again for coming. And also, I hope I see you involved as much as you can, as much as you feel comfortable. Just know that it's open. It's not just a small group. Everyone's welcome to participate. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Do we have anything else?
Yeah, maybe before we step on to the chapter committee meeting, the official meeting, is anybody have any questions about Fenestration Canada or anything that you'd like to know that maybe I didn't touch on, Murray?
I think it's important that people understand too that the national codes process is getting very much nationalized. And we all signed off on every one of the joint task groups at 1-9. We all signed off on a big thick document that said this is all an initiative to have one code for all Canada. No more regionalization. And in the background, I've been in the meetings where the federal government has stripped down the provincial government to be rogue. So being a leader province by doing things and causing reaction in Ottawa is not going to be the method that we're going to have influence moving forward. And that's why I'm switching to FEN Canada, SCHP Canada. Because for all of the points you just made, we got to harmonize the conversation. We don't have to come with harmonized solutions, but we need a national code that reflects nation and its needs. So in my opinion, it's very important.
Great. We're happy to have you as a participant for sure. Anything else? So Adrian. Okay. Yep. You're up, Adrian.
All right. So this is an open discussion really on the BC chapter. I'll give you guys a little bit of input on, the last conversation we had, we collected information for the BSSB or the Building Safety. Thank you. All right. Acronyms, not a big fan of acronyms. But no offense, RDH. Or yeah, sorry, a lot of acronyms. But
your corner.
sorry guys, I know. So we collected a handful of questions for the BSSB. We're gonna invite them to our next chapter meeting, and so they'll actually get to speak to some of the questions we have. That, like I said, has been kind of our reoccurring theme. I've been trying really hard to work with Terry and a handful of people within Canada to invite some good people to the table. We had one of my favorites was Energy and Mines. What's his name?
Cam Shook.
Cam Shook. So Cam Shook was able to talk with us a little bit about some of the provincial code changes that we had. Chris from the city of Vancouver came and chatted a little bit on their perspective on how they shaped theirs. Like I said, most of that I'm planning to continue to stay in step with, but I believe the education of BC is a vital resource if we want to provide it. As we kind of saw in this discussion, there are topics that probably deserve a bit more focus and some action items that we can work through. I think as we build this chapter, that is one of our real capabilities. But that is all going to be a bit contingent on what feedback I get from the chapter. I would say the two topics that I see the greatest need in getting ahead of currently, at least in BC, is this heat gain conversation and high performance retrofit. Those two areas seem to me to be real pain points and pieces where real industry input is necessary for us to be a bit more successful. But I want your input. What would you like to see out of our BC market when it comes to fenestration? What pieces do I need to bring players to the table so we can have good conversations and start shaping some action points about what we want to do with them?
The industry's all good. There's no problems in BC.
I heard.
That's what I've heard. Not a single problem.
We solved it.
We solved them. We solved them all.
And I thought my job was gonna be a lot harder. I mean, if it was anything like the installation side.
Yeah. David.
When's the next BC code printing?
The next BC code printing,
2023.
2023, will we see that? And that will incorporate the 2020, right?
So it's all online now.
No, I meant when it would be updated.
And that'll reference the 2020 NBC, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to wait for that to happen, which just happened 2 weeks ago.
And every province, if I'm not mistaken, is committed to a 24-month timeline, right?
No, not until the 2025, and then it's early adoption.
I thought that was 2020. No? Okay.
Will it affect because it's deleted by a year?
No, the BC is absolutely committed to that. If you read the 2020, we're in the midst of doing the code change, and I guess that's the Windows part of it. But that's a lot of the stuff that we were expecting in the 2020 national. So there's a lot of stuff on deck that's way down the road.